1 Samuel chapter 20, starting in verse 1. Then David fled from Naioth at Ramah and went to Jonathan and asked, "What have I done? What is my crime? How have I wronged your father that he's trying to kill me?" "Never," Jonathan replied. "You're not going to die. Look, my father doesn't do anything, great or small, without letting me know. Why would he hide this from me? It isn't so." Skip down to verse 13. Still Jonathan speaking. "If my father intends to harm you, may the Lord deal with Jonathan, be it ever so severely, if I do not let you know and send you away in peace. May the Lord be with you as he has been with my father. But show me unfailing kindness, like the Lord's kindness, as long as I live, so that I may not be killed. And do not ever cut off your kindness from my family, not even when the Lord has cut off every one of David's enemies from the face of the earth." So Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, "May the Lord call David's enemies to account." And Jonathan had David reaffirm his oath out of love for him, because he loved him as he loved himself. Skip down to verse 27, please. "But the next day, the second day of the month, David's place was empty again. And Saul said to his son Jonathan, 'Why hasn't the son of Jesse come to the meal, either yesterday or today?' Jonathan answered, 'Oh, David earnestly asked me for permission to go to Bethlehem. He said, 'Let me go. Our family's observing a sacrifice in the town, and my brothers ordered me to be there. If I found favor in your eyes, let me get away to see my brothers.' And that's why he has not come to the king's table." Saul's anger flared up at Jonathan, and he said to him, "You son of a perverse and rebellious woman, don't I know that you have sided with the son of Jesse to your own shame and the shame of the mother who bore you? As long as the son of Jesse lives on this earth, neither you nor your kingdom will be established. Now send someone to bring him to me, for he must die." "Why should he be put to death? What has he done?" Jonathan asked his father. But Saul hurled his spear at him to kill him. And Jonathan knew his father intended to kill David. Jonathan got up from the table in fierce anger. On that second day of the feast, he did not eat, because he was grieved at his father's shameful treatment of David. In the morning, Jonathan went out to the field for his meeting with David. He had a small boy with him, and he said to the boy, "Run and find the arrows I shoot." As the boy ran, he shot an arrow beyond him, and when the boy came to the place where Jonathan's arrow had fallen, Jonathan called out after him, "Isn't the arrow further out beyond you?" Then he shouted, "Hurry, go quickly, don't stop." The boy picked up the arrow and returned to his master. He knew nothing about all this, only Jonathan and David knew. Then Jonathan gave his weapons to the boy and said, "Go, carry them back to town." After the boy had gone, David got up from the south side of the stone, bowed down before Jonathan 3 times, with his face to the ground. They kissed each other and wept together, but David wept the most. Jonathan said to David, "Go in peace, for we have sworn friendship with each other in the name of the Lord, saying, 'The Lord is witness between you and me, between your descendants and my descendants forever.'" Then David left, and Jonathan went back to the town. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Well, we're talking about David's long path that's leading to the throne. This is 1,000 years before Jesus, if you're not super familiar with the storyline of the Bible. The story of this King David is about 1,000 years before Jesus. Nice round number you can remember. And we've seen that David is God's chosen king. God has a wonderful plan. We can't really understand what it's like to have a leader like David. We can't really wrap our brains around, in our day of politics and elections and all this silliness. We really can't hardly imagine what it's like to have a king as great as David. But let me just tell you, if you had David as your king, it would change your life. Your life would be so much better right now if David was your king. Everything in our society would be better if David was king. So when we read this passage, there ought to be a little bit of longing in our hearts. We're like, yes, that's what we want. That's what we need, a king like David. And Israel always felt like that. After David, they all felt like, yeah, that was the golden age. That was the good time. If only we could get back to the good old days when David was in charge. This book is written to show them how something like David happens. How you get a leader like David? And the answer is, in part, it is a long and painful road to get David as your king. It's a time of testing. It's a time where we see what David is made of. It's like the Olympics that just ended. It's not as fun, right? The Winter Olympics. It's real, though. Every time it happens, like, oh, I forgot that's a thing. I wonder if there's a spring and a fall Olympics that we don't know about. But there is a Winter Olympics. And it happens, and, they focus on there's certain hype around some athletes, and people are excited. There's a lot of hype about how good they are, and there's excitement that says, hey, when they get there, are they going to perform, or are we going to be disappointed? And some of them rise to the occasion and impress everybody, and some of them kind of fizzle out when they're under that international kind of pressure. It's really only in that pressure environment of that competition that you find out what they're made of. The same is true of David. It's in David running for his life, where he has the most powerful men around him all trying to kill him. We find out what David is made of. And this is also a time of testing, not just for David. It's a time of testing for the people. See, it's easy to love David once he's already the winner, once he's already in charge. Once David's already winning, you can pretend that you had the David bumper sticker on your car all along. But we all know. Some of you were not in favor of David. You didn't vote for David. You didn't like David. You were like Saul. You were opposed to him, right? And so this chapter is telling us David doesn't always look like the victorious champion. He is the one that God has chosen. He is the man of destiny. He is the king that you need, but not everybody recognizes him. And last week we talked about how King Saul is on that team. He does not recognize David. He has made it his mission in life to make sure that David never becomes the king. He's trying to stand right in the way of God's purposes with David. And in this chapter, we see sort of the other side of that. We see somebody who had the David bumper sticker on his car from the very beginning. And that is his friend, the prince, the son of Saul, Jonathan. The last chapter is all about his father's persecution of David. And this chapter is all about how Jonathan is there to defend David. This chapter is him standing with David. Find out this is a friendship. It's a costly friendship. Some of us have had friendships that seemed like really strong friendships, but they fizzled under that Olympic pressure, right? When there came a time of testing, all of a sudden our friend was nowhere to be found. They let us down in a big way. And we're going to find out if Jonathan is that kind of friend, or if Jonathan is the kind of friend that I hope you have, that I hope you are, the kind of friend that, as we'll see today, the kind of friend that we have in Jesus. The kind of friend that sticks closer than a brother, that is not chased away by the trial. So the chapter starts with David seeking out Jonathan. And this is, David's in trouble. And so he comes to Jonathan because he's the prince, because he's his close, trusted friend. They have this bond. They have this covenant together. And he's like, I need you to help me out. Your dad is trying to kill me. You've talked to him once before. And I've never really understood why Jonathan finds it so hard to believe that his father wants to kill David, since the last chapter literally started with Saul like, I want to kill David. And I hear Jonathan's like, no, my dad, no way, never. Like, yes, definitely has real love for his dad, overlooks his dad's errors here. So David's looking for help, and Jonathan is skeptical, but he swears to help David and find out what's going on. And what you see here is that Jonathan, from the very get-go, has very firmly taken his side with David. And that is a loyalty. This is how tough it is. His loyalty to David surpasses his loyalty even to his own family. And a lot of people say, well, blood's thicker than water. The most important thing is family. There's people that will, risk everything or ruin everything or let everything else burn as long as they can keep their family relations. Their family is everything, right? So it doesn't matter if my family's criminals or whatever. They're my family, and I'm going to stick with them no matter what. Well, Jonathan did not have that attitude. He said, whoever is on the Lord's side, blood may be thicker than water, but the Spirit is thicker than both. He says, whoever's on the Spirit's side, whoever's on the side of the Lord, he says, I'm on their side. David is in the right. We see Jonathan's first and primary loyalty is to David because his first and primary loyalty is to God. It's not just that David's his buddy and he sides with his buddy over his father. That's not the rule here. He sides with David because he is the chosen of the Lord. and Jonathan stands with God over his family. He understands to try to resist David is to try to stand in the way of what God is doing in the world. So his loyalty to God surpasses his loyalty to his family. And friend, it's so important that we see why that has to be. Why does your first and primary loyalty have to be to God? Not to your friends, not to your family, not to your country, not to anything. Your first and primary loyalty has to be to God. Now, why is that? Well, because that's right. Because God is right. He is true. He is the source of all goodness. To be opposed to God is by definition to be in the wrong. And to be against God is to introduce a moral stain into your life that nothing else can wash away. Let me give you an example of that. We don't have hardly anymore an idea of a moral stain, of a deep moral stain. But there's one I think that we still have. If I told you, yes, my great-grandfather lived, this isn't a true story, man. My great-grandfather from Germany, great man, scientist, artist, engineer, a wise man, a kind man, a gentleman, a family man. He was a Nazi. Isn't it funny how just those couple words suddenly introduces in our understanding of a person this deep moral stain? I think you can make an argument that's overblown a little bit. But that's my point is, there's something about that introduces a moral stain that we're saying it doesn't matter what else you stack on the other side of the scale. If you get that wrong, if you're on the side of evil or whatever, then there's no amount of good things that you could do or be or things that you could say about yourself that would counteract that, right? And let me tell you, 1,000,000 years from now, to hear somebody say, yeah, he's a good man, scientist, artist, an educated man, a family man, a patriot, he was a sinner. That moral stain will mean 10,000 times more to you than any talk about anybody being a Nazi today. It'll be a moral outrage 1,000,000 years from now that we can hardly imagine today. So Jonathan says, I'm with God, period, and that means I'm with David, period. We've seen how Jonathan had sworn oath to David. He did not swear his oath lightly, and here he carries out that oath. Now, Jonathan is confident that God is on David's side, that David will live, that David will reign, right? He says down there in verse number 14, show me unfailing kindness like the Lord's kindness as long as I live, so that I may not be killed. Do not ever cut off your kindness from my family, not even when the Lord has cut off every one of David's enemies from the face of the earth. Jonathan says, I already know how this story is going to end. Everybody that calls themselves an enemy of David is doomed. And that's not going to be me. Not going to be me. I'm not going to be an enemy of David. So he says, there's coming a day where everyone who stands against David is going to be cut off from the earth. And Jonathan said, it couldn't be me. So that he sees the writing on the wall. He sees, Jonathan, we might say, lives in light of the future God is making. It is a foolish thing to live for today. It's a foolish thing to live as if the world is always going to be like it is today in 2026. Now, kids especially should listen and think about this. It seems very important. It seems like the world today, it's like we feel this desire to fit in. We feel like it's so important that we make our way in the world, that we get all the good things this world has to offer. The message of the Bible is this world is passing away. So if you make all your decisions in life trying to have a great time today, well, I got bad news for you. The Bible says the form of this world is passing away. A new world is dawning. So here's Jonathan. He's the prince. And he's like, yeah, I know today I'm the prince. My dad's the king. It's a pretty good thing. This world is passing away. A new day is dawning. And in that day, David will be the king and all of his enemies will be cut off. And I'm living in light of the future. And that's how we should live today. And what Jonathan asks for, he asks for David to show him kindness. Now, kindness just means he wants David to treat him as a friend and not as his enemy. David, treat me like your friend. Don't treat me like an enemy. Now, probably most of us know, back then, that's not generally the way it worked. If you became the king and you took over from another king, or you conquered in that king's place, generally, what do? You kind of wipe out that whole family. You do a little, we do a little ethnic cleansing. We wipe out that whole family there, the entire family of the previous king, so they're not a threat to my throne. And Jonathan knows that's the ordinary way of things. But he says, David, I'm your friend. I'm not your enemy, I'm your friend. And so when the day comes and the Lord is cutting off your enemies from the face of the earth, he says, show me unfailing kindness. His desire, his request is that David would show him kindness. Jonathan sees himself as completely dependent on David. Now, this, again, we mentioned this a couple weeks ago. We talked about David and Jonathan's friendship. At first glance, this seems like it's really big of Jonathan. Wow, this is really nice of Jonathan, the prince, to kind of take David under his wing, to be nice to him. That's not how Jonathan sees this. In Jonathan's mind, this is not him doing some great favor for David. Jonathan knows that David will win because God is on his side. So Jonathan says, I am asking David for you to show me kindness. You look at this passage, it looks like David's showing up asking for kindness. Jonathan says, no. I'm the one asking for kindness. I'm asking you to show me kindness when you become king. He knows it's David who's going to rule. Now, so David, he may seem like a castaway. He may seem like nothing. Really, in 1 Samuel chapter 20, if you were a betting man, David's chances of making it to the throne are not looking real good. You're not going to throw away a lot of money on David. But Jonathan sees, by faith, the future that God has planned. He knows that it's going to be David, that David is on the path to honor and glory. And soon, the kindness of David will be the most valuable asset in all the world. What could be more valuable to Jonathan than the kindness of David? Now today, looks like the stock of David is not worth very much. But there's coming a time where David's kindness will be worth more than everything that Jonathan has in the world. Jonathan will not be the loser in this arrangement. As we'll talk about in a minute, even after he's dead, David's kindness will continue to pay out. When his family has lost their standing, their power, their money, even their physical health, David will still be there for Jonathan. And friend, it's easy maybe for you to think that you don't need anybody, you're not dependent on anybody. Like Jonathan would say, that's pathetic that Jonathan would be so dependent on another man. Listen, a day is coming too where the only thing that will matter to you in the whole world is kindness. Is someone showing kindness to you, specifically somebody like David showing kindness to you. We'll talk about that again in a second. So for Israel, imagine you're Israel a long time ago reading this story, what would it tell you? When God brings his king onto the scene, you got to make friends with him. And you have to crave his mercy. You get on his side and you ask for his mercy and for his kindness. So Jonathan and David, they make this little plan that David's going to miss this feast and they're going to see how Saul reacts. Well, Saul erupts like a volcano. He's an explosion of anger. He recognizes that his son is up to something with David, and he's angry. He knows that Jonathan's got that bumper sticker on his car. He knows that Jonathan is on Team David, and he's furious about it. He's like, do you not understand? You're not going to be the king if David lives. If David lives, you'll never sit on the throne. Of course, Jonathan does know that, and so he accuses Jonathan of deep disloyalty, of being a traitor to his family, and treats him like an enemy. Now, friend, if you stand on the side of the Lord and his purposes in this world, there will be times where you too will be accused of being a traitor, of being disloyal to your country, to your family, to your friends, to your children. People say, how could you do this to me? How could you not do what I want you to do if you stand with the Lord? And Saul is angry enough to throw a spear. Now that sounds a little familiar, doesn't it? We've seen Saul throwing spears at David. And now Jonathan, notice that, Jonathan is treated the same way by his father as he treated David. So Jonathan is really standing with David. So much so that he's being treated in the same way that David was being treated. So he is correct. Saul is correct, that is. David and Jonathan cannot both be king, and Jonathan is fine with it. So this, again, tells Israel, reading this story, you want a king? You want that great king like David? Well, guess what? Someone's going to throw a spear at you. Someone's not going to be real happy that you're standing for this king of God's own choosing. So we must be prepared to suffer along with him. And this story of this hostility between God and the world is found all through the pages of Scripture. So much so in James chapter 4 in the New Testament, talking to Christians like us, the author says, don't you know you cannot be the friend of the world and the friend of God? One of them will be your friend, and one of them will be your enemy. Let me clarify just for a second. We say the world will be your enemy. That doesn't mean that you can't have friends that aren't Christians. It doesn't mean that you will necessarily live a downtrodden, disrespected life. It doesn't mean that you will be constantly persecuted. After all, best we can tell, Saul and Jonathan they still had a good father-son relationship till the end of their life, besides this little episode of throwing a spear at somebody. Rather, what does it mean that we must be friends with God and the enemy of the world? Well, it means that there is a spirit in the world that we are at war with. When I hear the word world in the Bible, try to think of something like trending sins. Trending sins. The kids are always talking about what the trends are, what's trending. You know, there's always some sins that are trending. There are certain sins that today you don't feel any inclination whatsoever. You're not tempted one little bit to go out and sin that sin. But there's other kinds of sin that are in the atmosphere. They're in the air that we breathe. Kids, it feels like everyone is doing it. It feels like everyone is fine with it. And you feel the weight of the world crushing you. That's what the Bible means when it says the world. It means there's a spirit in the world. And when you stand against it, it feels like you're standing against the world. It feels like it's universal. And that is heavy. And that is what's going to happen. To say we're not friends with the world means we are against those sins. Doesn't matter how popular the sins are. Doesn't matter how trendy they are. Doesn't matter how harmless people say they are. We are standing against it. That means from time to time, someone like Saul throws a spear at us. Okay? Now, Jonathan faithfully sees this reaction from his father. He reports back to David. He gives him warning to escape. I think that's what's going on there. Jonathan does this little kind of signal thing where he shoots an arrow. I'm not confused by that. I still don't totally understand it. He shoots an arrow to David to be like, it's dangerous, run away. So there's your signal. And then David comes out anyway and they have a little talk. Like, why did you guys just talk about it in your little talk? Maybe that was Jonathan giving David fair warning. Hey, if you don't even trust me, or if you don't want to take the risk, you can just bolt right now. You can run if you want. But David does come out to say his farewell to Jonathan. And there's this great emotional farewell that we see between David and Jonathan. And there's this little part I want you to notice. Notice verse number 41. After the boy had gone, David got up from the south side of the stone, and he bowed down before Jonathan 3 times with his face to the ground. Then they kissed each other and wept together. And what does it mean when you see David's tears there? It means that he feels this in his heart. He has real heartache here. See, if you're a cynical person, I'm a little bit of a cynical person, you might say, come on. I mean, David, does he really care that much about this friendship with Jonathan? Obviously, he needs Jonathan. Obviously, this is wise politically. You know, it's like, you know, if you see somebody has, like, if you have somebody has a rich friend or a powerful friend, you're like, yeah, but do you really like them? Or are you just kind of sucking up to them? Or are you just sort of like, they're a very convenient friend for you to have? Is that what's going on with David? No, his tears tell us the truth here. David is deeply moved by the fact he's not going to see his friend again, likely. To see his sincere love. He's not using Jonathan. Even though he's on the receiving side of all the benefits right now, David has a sincere love for his brother, his friend, Jonathan. It's basically the end of their time together. Jonathan will be killed in battle. Now, I get so sick of this, and I'm sure you do too, but throughout the past 150 years or so, basically the modern era, there have been those who can't help but see suspicious hints of homosexuality here between David and Jonathan. And I would say that people who say such things expose themselves as the shallow-hearted, unimaginative people that they are. These men indeed are embracing and weeping, kissing in their culture, not on a normal day, but on a day of tremendous grief and danger. And if you can't imagine a day so traumatic that you would cling to your friends with tears, you're a shallow person. Now, this is an extreme day. Now, my best friend growing up was a guy named Tyler. Some of you know Tyler. And we were both missionaries. So he went as a missionary to Africa. I went as a missionary to Asia. And the problem with being a missionary and your friends are missionaries is you're basically never going to see each other again. So your times being back in America never quite line up. So we said goodbye to each other, and we left to go to different continents and basically never see each other again. And our wives were very upset that we didn't hug each other or anything. We were just like, all right, see you later. So left. Shook hands, I think. And they were like, how could they not hug? How could they not even show any affection? It's like, well, guys, we feel it, right, in our hearts, but that's not going to help anything. But this is something even more traumatic for David. An even more traumatic day. And surely, if you have an ounce of imagination, you can imagine a day so terrible and so traumatic that you would just be shattered. And yes, even you, masculine guys, would hug and cry with your friends. But notice this is what it says. This is really fascinating. I've always remembered this from verse 41. They kissed each other and wept together, but David wept the most. What is this, a contest? What's going on? Like, who cries more? What that's showing is, again, it wants us to guard against any idea that David is just kind of like using Jonathan here. No, I mean, Jonathan himself had an impression like, wow, I'm feeling this. I'm sad in my heart. Clearly, David is much more broken up about this than I am. David was true. And what that shows us is David's great heart. There was actually more room for Jonathan in David's heart than there was room for David in Jonathan's heart. This is David's great kingly heart who feels so deeply with his people. See how great his love is for Jonathan. Let me tell you, that's what makes David the great king. That's what makes him the perfect king, is that he feels so much for his people. His overwhelming compassion, his great, sincere, not faked love for others. Because soon, it won't just be Jonathan. David doesn't just have room for Jonathan in his heart. Soon he'll have room for the entire people of Israel, or at least for many, many people in Israel. David will show them his love. And Israel will always be amazed at David's love for them as a people. And we see that here in David's we see David's great heart here. So, but there's a limitation to David's love. Yes, does David love Jonathan? Yes, he loves him very much. But what's going to happen here? They're basically going to be separated. And David swore this oath. He's like, yeah, I'm going to show you kindness all your life. It's not going to be me who attacks you, Jonathan. I'll show you kindness all your life. Yeah, but Jonathan's life is just about over. David can't save Jonathan. Jonathan will be killed on a battlefield against the Philistines. And when David here, it's one of the most moving parts of Scripture, when David gets the news that his friend, he calls him his brother Jonathan, has been slain in battle. And he writes one of the most moving songs in Scripture in 2 Samuel chapter 1. David's brokenhearted. He had a covenant. He swore he would show kindness to Jonathan. But his covenant, his power, was not strong enough to save Jonathan's life. He could not. Once Jonathan died, there was only so much David could do. Now, the amazing thing is that we do see a little picture here. David was committed to showing kindness to Jonathan even after he died. So what did he do? He said, remember what Jonathan said? Don't ever cut off your kindness from my family. So David, this beautiful part of Scripture where David has already become king. This is the next book, 2 Samuel. David is already the king. He's already reigning. And he says, I got to find somebody from Jonathan's family. Is there anyone still alive from Jonathan's family that I could show kindness to? He goes on a hunt. And he finds that Jonathan has a son who's a cripple, who can't walk, he's handicapped. And his life has obviously been turned upside down by the death of his father, his grandfather. And David shows him kindness all the days of his life. He says, I want to show him kindness for the sake of Jonathan. So you see this wonderful love, this covenant that David has, even beyond the grave. For generations, David is showing kindness to his friend Jonathan. That's the kind of king that he is. So this is telling Israel, when you get the right king, a king like David pours out blessings that endure for generations. Look at verse 14. There's a little translation thing I'll point out here. Jonathan says, I'm reading the NIV here. He says, but show me unfailing kindness like the Lord's kindness as long as I live. Now, if you're looking at that, pretty much any other translation could say something like, show me the Lord's kindness. The reason the NIV spells it out like that is trying to say, how does David show somebody the Lord's kindness? See what Jonathan understands? David, you are God's king. When you show me kindness, you are a tool of God. You're an instrument that God is using to show kindness. David's kindness equals God's kindness. When David the king does something kind and gracious for you, that's actually God showing you kindness and graciousness through David. So that's what he wants to see. And so what does this passage tell us? This passage is telling us something about the Lord's kindness for us. The same word kindness is often found in the Bible. It talks about the Lord's loving kindness or his mercies that you can read about, depending on your translation. Very famously in the Psalms, there's a psalm where every verse ends with what? His mercy endures forever. Same word, his kindness. His kindness endures forever. His kindness endures forever. The Lord's kindness for us is even greater than David's kindness to Jonathan. It lasts forever. Of course, David's heirs, those who came after David, his sons and his grandsons and his great-grandsons, were not quite the king that David was. They turned out to be little-hearted men with not a lot of room in their hearts to show love to their people. They weren't the great-hearted kings. They didn't have that kingly heart of David. And the prophets, though, spoke of a king that was coming that would love the people like David had loved the people. And of course, that king is none other than the Son of David, our King and Savior, the Son of God, Jesus Christ. As we mentioned last week, there's a similarity between David's life and Jesus' life. Is that Jesus is also destined for honor and glory, but we see him walk this long, hard path of humility and persecution. We see him walk down in the dust where he's destined for a throne. Of course, the throne that he's destined for is going to be much higher even than Jonathan's. So when you read 1 Samuel, what are you supposed to feel when you read all these stories? You're supposed to say, there's nobody like David. Nobody like David. Amazing. The song we just sang, what a friend we have in David. That's what you're supposed to feel when you read 1 Samuel. To have David as your friend was an unbelievable blessing. But we as Christians have found a friend that's even greater. And we say, hallelujah, what a Savior. What a friend we have in Jesus. And his mercies are even greater than the mercies and the kindness that David could show to Jonathan. We see that Jesus, as he walks that path, we see again, it's a time of testing. Until we see Jesus sitting on a throne and reigning in power over all the world, even today, what is this? It's a time of testing. It's a time where we see what we saw when Jesus walked the earth, we saw what he was made of through that time of testing. We saw him live a perfect, glorious life. We saw him suffer the ultimate attack, where he was killed, where he was murdered, and he even rose from that trial and adversity. He rose from death, as we'll celebrate here at Easter. When we read all this, what are we supposed to feel? There's no one like Jesus. We're supposed to love him and cast ourselves upon his mercies. What we should do, when we look at Jesus, we hear the story of Jesus. This is what we're trying to do every week at our church. We try to talk about Jesus every week. I hope that you notice that and pay attention to that. We talk about Jesus every week because he is the king that God has chosen. And just like you could look at David and be like, don't look like a king today, but he is going to reign until all of his enemies have been cut off from the earth. So too, we can look at Jesus and say, you can ignore Jesus today, you can doubt Jesus today, you can sin against Jesus today, but make no mistake, he will reign forever. All of his enemies will be cut off from the earth. You're either with him or you're against him. If you're with him, you're in line with God's purposes, you're standing on God's side. If you're against Jesus, you will find yourself fighting against God himself. When we read the Bible, we should feel there's no one like Jesus. It should make us love him and cast ourselves upon his mercies. You say, well, what does Jesus want me to say? Ever wonder that? Especially if you're not a Christian yet. You say, well, what does Jesus want out of me? Look at verse 14. This is what, you could take the words right out of Jonathan's mouth today. This is what you could say to Jesus. And Christians, we are people who have said, verse 14 of Jesus, show me the Lord's kindness as long as I live, so that I may not be killed. That's what we come to Jesus with our lives in danger. We say, you're going to be the king. Show me the Lord's kindness so that I will live. When Jesus shows you kindness, make no mistake, it is actually God's own kindness that is being shown to you. So Jesus rose to honor and glory, and now he lives to show eternal kindness, and he will continue to do so until every enemy has been cut off. Even today, his people still stand with him. Spears are thrown at us. We suffer with him like Jonathan suffered with David. And we hope in his mercy. So, if you're not a Christian, we would exhort you and tell you, listen, Jesus is going to reign. And we want you to see what a wonderful king and friend he is. And he, unlike David, who did not have the power to save his friend, Jesus is a king, a friend who has every power to rescue and to save you. He's ready today to swear to you. See, Jonathan comes to David and he's like, please show me this kindness. And of course, David was very ready to show him this kindness. Friend, Jesus today is even more ready. He stands ready to receive you. You say, if I go to Jesus, would he take me? Would he accept somebody like me? Yes, he would. Would Jesus be willing to be my friend? Like David was Jonathan's? Would he be willing to be that friend to me? Yes, he would. Would he be able to show me that kind of unfailing kindness, the kindness of the Lord that endures forever? Oh, yes, he would, if you'd go to him today. Pledge yourself to him as Jonathan pledged himself to David. We talked about that a couple weeks ago, where Jonathan said, my sword, my belt, my robe, my bow, it's all yours. Pledge yourself to Jesus. You see, his affection for his people is so great that he will never allow anything to separate him from his people. And for Christians, this is wonderful news for us. Notice today, David's love is greater than Jonathan's. And Jesus' love is for us is so much greater. His love for you, friend, is so much greater than your love for him. Your love for him is probably pretty cold and pathetic, to be honest. But his love for you is warm and it is enduring. And there's nothing that will ever change it. Kids, this is good news. Kids, almost every kid I've ever met is pretty much fixated on their friends. I want friends. I want my friends. I want to have more friends. I want to have good friends. I want friends. I want that kid over there to be my friend. I don't know why this person won't be my friend. You're fixated on other friends, but you're never too young to learn that Jesus will be the best friend that you could ever have. He'll be a friend when all others fail you. You may not have lots of friends now, but knowing that you are loved and cared for and listened to by Jesus will get you through anything. And Christians, one thing that we can pray today, we can pray and ask the Lord to grow our affection for Jesus. Again, when you read this text, one of the things you're supposed to be, your heart is supposed to sort of sing and say, wow, there is no one like David. David is so awesome. The passage is written so that you're impressed with David. So you think he's great. You admire him. And the whole Bible is written so that we would admire and be just completely impressed with the person of Jesus. As Pastor Dick pointed out, the whole Bible is written to impress us about Jesus. And that's why in our church we try to make every message, every sermon, every lesson is not just, hey, here's some good advice for you about your life or your family or your money or your country or something. We're here to tell you about Jesus and how he's the friend that you need. And once again, if you stand with Jesus, you should expect to be targeted, criticized for disloyalty. But your friend Jesus says to you, blessed. You're blessed when you are persecuted for my name's sake. Are you persecuted for my name's sake? You persecuted because you stand with Jesus? Yours is the kingdom of heaven. He promises that you will be blessed forever. There's a reward in heaven for you. Parents, think about Saul here and how, or think about Jonathan. Jonathan makes this oath of kindness to stand with David, and long after he's dead, there's still benefit for his children. Parents, if you are not raising your children, if you're not living as a friend to Jesus today, you are doing huge harm to your children. It is a loss that they can never, ever recover. The most valuable thing that we could ever pass on to our children is this friendship, this heritage of knowing Jesus. Because long after we're gone, Jesus will still be faithful to our children, just as David was faithful to Jonathan's son after he was gone. Now, think about Jonathan as he reached the moment of death. As Jonathan reached the moment of death, and he closed his eyes on that battlefield, I wonder if he thought in his heart, it's going to be okay. I have that covenant with David. He's shown me the Lord's kindness, and that means even though I'm dying, everything's going to be taken care of. And David will care for my family even after I'm gone. Christians, one of the things we have to learn to do as Christians is we have to learn to die. We should be preparing even now for the day of our death when it comes. Christian friend, don't let death meet you unprepared. And because we're the friends of Jesus, that's really the only way that we can approach the moment of death with peace and calm. One day you will lie in a deathbed, probably, and when you close your eyes and seem to be separated from all, you can say with your dying breath, show me unfailing kindness, like the kindness of the Lord. May your kindness to me endure forever, and you will wake to find that his kindness will endure for you even beyond the grave. And the last little exhortation I'd give us as a church is, Christians have always found in this story a wonderful picture of what friendship is all about, of what godly friendship is. Notice that God gives David and Jonathan to each other as gifts. God's purpose for David involved Jonathan, and God's purpose for Jonathan involved David. And here today as a church, here's something else that we can say. God's purpose for you involves the people that are sitting around you. And God's purpose for me involves you. He gives us as gifts to one another. Now, I've noticed that every church has a bit of a flavor to it. Every church I've ever served is always a unique flavor, too. All churches, you can say all churches have a churchy flavor. You know, all churches taste like church. But every church has there's a slight difference, there's a slight little twist on the recipe in every church. God is making he does these wonderful chemistry projects in churches. Sometimes it can be explosive. But in God's wonderful chemistry projects, he puts us all together. And I am very impressed and I'm amazed our church is a young church. And I see how there's a different story for how each one of us ended up here in our church. God's mixing up something here. He's doing his wonderful chemistry work here. He's mixing something together. So I encourage you to pursue that. To be curious about that. To try to get a taste of what this church is about. To try to meet those around us and try to build some of these David and Jonathan type friendships with each other. To recognize God's purpose for us involves the people around us. So sometimes it helps to add some coffee or other chemical to the blend. But to believe in that God is mixing up something here, even in the mix of our church. That some of us, isn't it true for some of us that a huge part of your spiritual growth and your spiritual life has been due to a couple key friends in your life? Certainly true of me, and it's probably true of you as well. So maybe there's more of that latent in the chemistry of our church. Maybe God has put you here. Or maybe there's someone that God has put here to further somebody's life like that. Let's pray.